Hey guys, I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to take a few minutes here and cover some of the concepts in terms of the early stages in the development of the group process. So today we're simply just going to touch on the very basics. Obviously, if you have more questions or in-depth questions, feel free to shoot me an email and we can discuss that individually. So in terms of the early stages of the group process, it's pretty simple. I mean, really, what we're looking to do is simply just identify a particular group that we feel will meet the needs of our particular clients or students. Now, one of the key things in terms of that is we want to be very, very specific in terms of what our group is going to be. So, what I mean by that is, let's say, for example, you want to do a group on anxiety. Okay, that's great. But what do you mean about anxiety? Okay, so we have this kind of big picture, if you can kind of visualize it, and you want to do anxiety group. Well, what about anxiety? Are we talking about anxiety in terms of specific skills related to school? Are we talking about specific skills related to work? Are we talking about, again, you want to be very specific. So let's say, for an example, you say, okay, well, I'm going to put together an anxiety management group for, let's say, school. So to be successful in school. Okay. What population are you going to gear your group to? So are we gearing it to high schoolers? Are we gearing it to college students? Are we gearing it to returning students? Again, when you have this idea, you want to kind of visualize this big idea up here, getting it smaller and smaller and smaller in terms of being more specific and more specific. The reason why is because you want your group to be very efficient and very successful in terms of addressing the very specific needs of that particular area. Okay. So, even more so, let's say you've got a particular group that you want to do on anxiety management and you want to work with or identify and work on skills related to being successful within school. And we're going to do college students. Okay. Again, every experience, every college student, things along those lines can be very, very different. So, are we talking about anxiety management skills in terms of online learning? Are we talking about anxiety management skills in terms of in the classroom? Are we talking about anxiety management skills in terms of someone coming straight from high school? Are we talking about, you get where I'm going with this? You really want to get smaller and smaller and smaller, again, to make sure that you're addressing the specific needs of that particular population. And then, more importantly, we want to see what is going to be our theory, what is going to be our philosophical orientation in terms of setting the specific group up. And we find that simply by going to the research. What works with the particular population in which we plan on working with? What hasn't worked? What considers to be best practice? And then, obviously, with anything, we have to make sure that we are identifying and addressing the idea of cultural competency. We want to make sure that we are taking into account, the multiculturalism, the diversity that may be presented within our particular group. So again, that we meet the needs of everyone going in there. Okay, so in terms of setting up our group, and again, I'm just hitting on the basics today in terms of what it is that you need to be aware of. Once you have that idea in terms of what you're going to prepare and what you're going to do, you need to think about who's going to lead this group in terms of the training, in terms of the expertise. Is it going to be one person? Is it going to be co-facilitated? What are going to be the roles, the responsibilities that are going to be distributed amongst these particular leaders? And again, I'm kind of repeating myself here, but what type of training is going to go into this particular leader? What type of leadership styles may be needed in terms of facilitating and developing the curriculum for this particular type of group? So those are things that are very important in terms of how we're going to facilitate that and need to be addressed. So within the early stages of group development, one of the big things obviously is recruitment. So we've identified, our target audience, but how are we going to recruit? How we're going to screen and select, those particular group members. And again, it really depends upon the context in which you are in. Things we want to make sure in terms of that screening process is that, again, that those individuals are going to meet the objectives, the goals, and get something out of that particular thing. There's many different ways in which you can recruit people in terms of referrals. Let's say, for an example, we're going to do that anxiety management group on a college campus. So we could put out, on-campus advertising, social media, reaching out to faculty and staff in terms of referrals, reaching out to particular student affair and academic departments in terms of that. And then obviously putting together some sort of good screening and assessment tool. So when we meet with those individuals, that they do and will meet the objectives and goals in terms of that particular group. So practical concerns in terms of the formation of your particular group. And again, these are not all of them, but these are some good things to keep in mind as you develop the early stages within your group and how you're going to go about doing your group. So one of the very important things in my mind that really stands out is your group going to be open or closed? Okay. So what that really means is an open group means that people can kind of come and go as they please. So there's pros and cons to that, obviously. A little bit more flexible, a little bit more open, hence the name, in terms of the individuals going to coming in. So they can come in as they want and leave as they want, get what they want in terms of that. The problem with that is sometimes it kind of hurts or negatively impacts the intimacy of the group. So you don't necessarily, or even just the collaboration in terms of the individuals within. So you may have different people every single week. So it's kind of like the first day of class or the first day of group every week in terms of that. The flip side is that we can have something called a closed group. So once we have our members, let's say we've designated to 10 people and we've got those 10 people in, that's the same 10 people we're going to have. Even if we lose somebody, we can't have somebody else come in until the end of that. Again, the pros is we form, ideally, a very closed, tight-knit group. It becomes a very intimate group. Some of the problems with closed is obviously kind of the obvious. Someone who may really benefit from that particular group may not necessarily be able to come into that particular group. Sometimes, again, diversity is a good thing. So having people kind of free flowing within that group, bringing in new ideas, kind of keeping the ideas of the group becoming stale, things like that. Again, open, closed group. So you really want to identify which one of those two you're going to have. The other thing you really want to keep in mind on is, are these members going to be voluntary? Or is it going to be involuntary? So the thing that kind of springs to my mind is really the idea of motivational interviewing, the stages of change. I often ask my students, what's your feeling? What's your thought on mandating counseling, mandating group counseling? Because ideally, nobody's going to change unless they want to. So should our group be voluntary or should it be involuntary? And how are we going to address those particular things, especially if we have an involuntary mandated type of group in terms of that? One of the things that really kind of pops up in my mind when we talk about mandated or involuntary is, say someone gets a DUI, DWI, and then they're mandated to take some sort of class in regards to their behavior. It's always fascinated me how the group leader or the co-facilitators can really encourage or empower those individuals within that group to actually make a change, to recognize the consequences of their actions so they don't do that thing again. Other ideas we want to keep in mind in terms of the formation of a group, is it going to be, and I'm going to pronounce these wrong, homogeneous or heterogeneous types of groups? Are we going to, and use your imagination when we say this, so it doesn't necessarily have to just be male, female, throw in whatever. How are we going to set this particular group up? Again, I encourage diversity. That tends to be a good thing. Sometimes it may not, depending upon the topic and the context, but how are we going to keep this type of group? Age is another good thing. Is this group going to be solely Um, Adolescence, is this group going to be solely for older individuals? Is this group going to be specifically for a particular sexuality? What is it? So those are one of the things. And again, there's pros and cons to both. Meeting place. The context of our group in the meeting place is obviously going to have a huge impact on the success and the efficiency rate of that particular group. So, are we going to meet in a very private location? Are we going to meet in a very public location? What is going to be the condition of that particular location? The setting, is it a classroom? Is it a nice lounge area? Believe it or not, is it a room that is comfortable in terms of temperature? Is it something that's going to be easy to access? Maybe not everybody has transportation, so some people may need to take the bus. Again, use your imagination here. We want to make sure that our meeting place is going to meet the needs of the individuals that are coming into our particular group. Group size, another thing to really keep in mind. Again, it really depends upon the group. So I've had groups that have been, 20, 25, 30 people. I've had other groups that were very intimate and there was maybe 2 or 3 people. It really depends upon the topic in which you're trying to address. And again, it also really depends upon the leader. So are you someone that is comfortable working with 20, 30 people that within your particular leadership style can almost make the room very small? Are you someone that is going to simply just stand in one spot, or are you someone that's really going to move around in terms of that group and interact with each person individually? A thing that kind of pops up in my mind, in the regard, in addition to being a clinician, I'm also a college professor, and I've taught in lecture halls with hundreds and hundreds of people. And one way in which I did the best, and a great way to keep in shape too, is I would go up and down the stairs and in between rows. And it kind of freaked people out a little bit, but it made the room a little bit smaller in my mind and some of the students' minds because the professor wasn't just sitting in the front of the room. You lose some of the people on the back. And again, with you, the group size. What are you comfortable with? What do you think is going to best meet the needs of those particular students and so forth, or clients? Frequency, length of meetings, that ties in very nicely to another topic we want to keep in mind, which is our group going to be short term or is it going to be something that's going to be long term? Is it going to be something that is very solution focused? Or is this something that's going to address a particular topic over a long period of time? And again, this really depends upon the topic that you are looking to address and the individuals that you have with you. So, something that springs to my mind, something I've done in the past, if you're working on an inpatient unit with individuals, whether it be mental health or addiction, a long term type of group just isn't going to be realistic. Those individuals only may be there for a couple days. That also goes back to open and close. So, you may have more of an open group because people are kind of coming and going. So, how are you going to best address and meet the needs of your particular individuals? Also, what is it that they're bringing? Are we talking about people that tend to be more higher functioning? Are we talking about people who tend to be more lower functioning? What is going to be best? Are you in an academic setting where you only have 15 weeks? Are you the kind of guys you get where I'm going with this? Frequency, length of meetings, short term, long term. How is it going to best meet the needs of that? Okay. So that's really kind of the main first things or the first stage that we tend to look at in terms of putting our group together. I just want to make sure I hit on a couple other things. One of the big things you also want to be aware of is what we kind of refer to as stage two. And again, there's many different ways in which we break this down. But the characteristics of those first meetings. So we've gone through all those details. We've set up our group. We've screened. We've brought people in. And now we have the first meeting. What are some of the things that we need to be aware of? What are some of the things we need to address? One, group rules, confidentiality. I often get a lot of students who ask me, is it you that makes the rules? Is it the group that makes the rules? Best practice, you both do it. Why do you pull the clients or the students into the group making process? I'm sorry, the rule making process. Well, if they identify the rules and they establish them, they own it. So if they break it, it's on them in terms of that. And obviously, you want to have the group leader involved because you want to make sure that these group rules are meeting the ethical principles in terms of confidentiality and so forth in terms of moving forward. Every time you guys meet, you always review those rules and review confidentiality, even if you've met 10, 20 times. Again, you're doing that for the safety of the people within the group. And at the same time, you're doing that in terms of liability and making sure that you were covered as well in terms of that. Some of the big primary tasks of those first initial sessions are really inclusion and identity, not only identifying what the meaning of the group is, but the meaning of each individual within that group and how they're going to process and move forward within it. What is going to be their role? What is their goal? What is their objective in terms of that? And you, as the group leader, it's really put on you to include, to empower, to motivate those particular individuals. And we do that, simply through many different topics, many different ways. Obviously, those individuals coming in are going to be anxious. We need to identify, why are they there in terms of it? How are we going to help those particular individuals overcome that particular anxiety? How are we going to get particular individuals to be included within that particular group? We want to make sure that we establish trust. I've said this 1,000 times with a lot of my students. The therapeutic alliance or relationship is the most important thing within the counseling relationship, whether it be individual or group. And I say this very, very sarcastically. You can be a complete idiot and know nothing about psychology or counseling. But if you form a really good therapeutic alliance with somebody, they will listen to you. On the flip side, you could be a genius in terms of counseling and psychology. But if you can't talk to somebody and you can't establish trust, they're never going to listen to you. They're never going to trust you. Nothing's ever going to happen. So that therapeutic alliance is very, very important in terms of establishing that particular trust. So how do we do that? How do we maintain trust? How do we establish trust? Well, we simply do that through basic social interaction skills, listening, paraphrasing, active listening, asking questions, body language. Those nonverbals are extremely important, that you don't just look like a statue in terms of their demonstrating those person-centered skills that Rogers often talked about in terms of genuineness, congruence, empathy. The thing that is most important to me is simply just unconditional positive regard. Regardless of whatever that person has done, we accept them. We want to work with them. Whatever it is that they did is not necessarily their totality. I often get students who ask me, how were you able to work with that person based on what they did? Well, you find one good thing about that particular person and you lock onto it. Again, just because, and again, this is my philosophy, you can buy into whatever it is that you want, but based upon, that one thing isn't necessarily their totality, and that's how you're able to work with them. Some things, again, in terms of the group leader within that initial stage, modeling, this is the way in which we are going to interact. This is the way in which we are going to treat each other. The group leader models that, demonstrates those particular things, being very clear in terms of identifying the goals and objectives of that particular group, making sure that there is some sort of structure. Again, kind of going back, how long are we meeting for? An hour, bathroom breaks, snacks, how are we setting up? Those types of things. The division of responsibility, okay? Who's in charge of what? Who's doing what? Those particular types of things. And then again, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, dealing with reluctance. How do we address the anxiety that may be coming up in terms of our group? How are we going to recognize and deal with conflict within our particular group? How are we going to deal with when clients or students challenge us as the group leader? It's an addiction group. Why are you talking to us about addiction? Have you ever dealt with the things in which we have done? How are you going to answer that? How are you going to come back in terms of that? How are you going to manage your own defensiveness in terms of your emotions when you are challenged within that particular group? And then obviously, that last part is essential. I really push that, encourage that. As a group leader, what are your triggers? What are your flags in terms of being aware that these things are going to happen within that particular group? How are you going to deal with transference? Will you be able to identify and appropriately work with countertransference if that were to happen in terms of that? Okay. So again, those just covering the very, very basics of the early stages of the group process and development. Hopefully, that gives you a better idea, kind of leading into your group, what to identify, what to work with, and obviously some ideas to kind of keep in mind as we move forward. Again, if you have any questions, definitely feel free to shoot me an email and keep a lookout for further videos in terms of the group process and counseling. All right, thanks, guys.